Hi, and welcome to video 2 in lesson 2, which is the introduction to stock turnover concepts. In this video, we're going to go over the different concepts that constitute within stock turnover before actually going to stock turnover methods inside of Leap. If you remember in the lesson 1 in the last videos, I was talking about that we have 4 main methodologies in Leap to work from. 2 of those we covered in lesson 1, I think in video 9 and 10. And in video 3 and 4 in this lesson, we are going to cover the other 2, which are both stock turnover methods. And what exactly that means, we'll get to now. The fundamental reasoning for stock turnover methods is that things change over time. If you see any of commercial product today that is not the same as it was 10 years ago or 25 years ago, neither it is not at all what we might see in 5 or 10 years. We may have good ideas of what it will look like in the future and the learnings that will take place, but how exactly that differs from the current status is something we might want to make explicit in our model. Now, the problem with just the other methods we have touched upon until now is that they all work with averages. So when we take a certain year, let's say in 2025, we cannot tell quite a lot about what happens in this year. So in this slide, I set up a very specific but random situation where we have 3 types of refrigerators in our system. The old one of which comprises of 60% of all the refrigerators, and it uses 100 kilowatt hours per year. A decent one, which is 70 kilowatts hours a year, but that only constitutes 30% of the total stock. And then we have a very efficient one, which is 10% of the stock in this year, and it only uses 30 kilowatt hours per year, meaning less than a third of the majority of the actual of the fridges. Now, if we were to take the average of that, comprising down just the median of the fridges, we will get an average which is here more or less dead center, which would comprise that we would basically say that at the average fridge in this system would be around 75 kilowatt hours per year of usage, and that's just how all fridges would look like. But that's not the actual real situation, that things develop over time. So if we then go forward again 5 years again, we don't know what would have happened if we were putting in energy efficiency policies to have these refrigerators that are degrading over time, getting replaced with hopefully newer, more efficient models. What will actually happen? We can only really have somewhat of a linear approach to our development. So that's why we have stock turnover method. So in stock turnover, in all basics, that is new sales or sales of new products replace sales that were done some number of years ago that are still where the product is still in the system. So we can see going forward, we have a replacing of the different products to a newer product method that then goes forward. So again, as the year progresses, then especially old things that have degraded are replaced by brand new things, which means it's not just a linear replacement happening from one year to the next. It might be a very inefficient product being replaced with a brand new, very efficient product, but maybe even with a different technologies. And that is very difficult to accurately tell with just using averages. I mean, if this year you replace 5% of your vehicle stock with BEVs, or your vehicle sales, 5% of your vehicle sales are BEVs, what does that mean for the stock? Either you have to calculate that beforehand in Excel somehow with a stock turnover like method, and then just put in the final results and hope that people can refer back to your former calculations, or you would have to make some quite broad assumptions and very difficult calculations within Leap to have that fit. But with Dr. Nova, we can just make that replacement directly, really. So I'd like to keep you in mind that we have current accounts and we have projection scenarios again. In the last exercise, we were looking at current accounts and projection scenarios having slightly different data input and methodology. And I want you to keep that in mind, because that happens quite a lot in stock turnover. Statistics is not the same as projections in the stock turnover method. So if in stock turnover methods that new products enters via sales, then how do they exit again? Because we need both components. Well, that's where this comes in, the survival profile, and we will be talking about this in specifics quite a bit. So in a survival profile, that basically states that in year 0, the year the product was born, all the products of that year are still in the system. So if 100 new refrigerators were sold in 2020, the rest of the year we assume that there are still 100 left. Well, by 2025, next year, a few of them might have gone bust. Then in about 5 years, maybe quite a lot of them are no longer there. And by maybe in 8 years, these are bad refrigerators, there will be just 3% of them left. This is a fictitious example, of course, but this is generally what is referred to. What is the statistical chance of a product of a certain year surviving for another number of years before it is retired? So that is the survival profile in the most simple method. So we also have degradation profiles. In the simple methodology, that's called the marginal final energy intensity, or otherwise known as degradation. Basically, that states that in the year 0, where the product was new, it works at 100% efficiency, but as it gets older, it will become dusty inside. Some of the motors maybe in the refrigerator for the cooling might not be quite as efficient anymore. Something might have gotten a loose. And then before it is retired, actually the average fridge of this age actually will have degraded quite a bit in terms of its energy efficiency. That way we can also take into account that not only is the energy efficiency of a new product probably better than an old product, but the old product has actually degraded since then, and so will the product sold this year as well into the future. But let's just for a second return to our example with our 3 types of fridges. Now that we know that these fridges from 2025, they're all coming backwards, then, or some of them are older than we have today, like how does that look like in the stock turnover method? Well, for that we have the stock vintage profile. Basically that says, of all the fridges that are in the system today at this date, how many of them are from last year, how many of them are from 2 years ago, and so on. And thereby we can find ourselves a profile of the existing stock in the year we are in right now, which you can usually fits quite well with statistics. This can be a little bit difficult with consumer products, but it's not quite impossible. Sometimes sales statistics has some good idea if you mix that with a survival profile. Otherwise, with something like vehicles, we have registration, so it can be hopefully easier if you can get those. But in this case, it is not just as simple as in some economies that we have most of the newest because the older ones have degraded away, but we may have had good years and bad years. So during recession years, quite a lot of fewer products have been sold. During especially the year like 2020, we have seen that in the spring months, quite a lot of sales has been avoided. We'll see if the autumn and winter picks up on that. but other than that, we can see that then these can swing quite widely. So we have to take that into account. Now, with the stock turnover methods, we're going to have quite a lot more variables into the system. We're going to have a lot more definition to our different technologies and components in our system, which may seem to make the system quite a lot more difficult, and it is more difficult to actually put into Leap, but it does come with quite a lot of benefits. So if you take the general sales of a product time for refrigerators, for instance, we may have a number of competing subcategories for this specific prototype, for this product type. Now, these we can define in a number of ways because these are just the normal technologies, but with a stock turnover. So, do they have different fuels? Do they have different energy efficiencies? Do they progress differently? So, for instance, are we trying to go over to a different product type that might not be more efficient right now, but we think is better for the system overall in 5 years, but we need a lead up to that. And more so, there's a lag effect. So there's a difference between the sales, the year for the sales or number of sales occurring of a special technology, if you're changing from one technology to the other, or from one subcategory to another, to that would be the dominant in future time, and how long would that be, and we can tell that. So in general, what we will do with stock turnover is that we will specify a sales of the category. So we could put this as one big number basically in one of our categories, and then divide it out to different shares. Some of them of course could be 0, and then we can pick and choose between them based on a policy. So this could be the results of an EE policy. This over here could be a result of a fuel switch, and then we can define these based on which policies we actually want to put into our system. So it's a quite well-defined method of doing these things, and it's very explicit. So that's quite good. Now, what is the general benefit? So the initial setup can be a little difficult, might take some time, especially to gather the right data maybe, and it's a little more concrete what you need to do. But after that has been done, the policy making is usually done with just by pulling very few strings for the right parameter that can be shared between these, and we'll look more towards that. We can have a very precise definition of our policies. So are we choosing this policy or this technology type? And it could be basically like between refrigerator A policy and refrigerator B policy. Because of what? Because of the energy efficiency progression might be different between them, even though they're the same today more or less. If you choose two different kinds of policies in two different scenarios, those can be shown as essentially the same technologies, but just implemented in different ways, and we can see that and we can show that. And that also means that since it's more concrete what we do and it's much more explicit in the model, it is also much easier for policymakers and politicians and in general just people to understand this methodology. Okay, if we want 30% of high efficiency refrigerators, we can't just do that in sell 30% the next 3 years. No, we have to start selling 80%. You can prove that, you can show them that is what it takes, and you can show that very explicitly, which is quite powerful. You have more parameters to adjust, so you could, in the same branch in Leap, you can go for both, again, EE, fuel switching, or different, just completely different, so mode shifting scenarios, for instance, where you can play with a lot of different parameters. Now, also one of the big ones I haven't shown explicitly is when I talk about these things, and we will see that more in 3, 4, and 5, that the data we're going to be working with now, the main data going to be working with now, that's product category data then. Now, instead of having some average of all the cumulative products in the or sum of products in the that we have in a certain category, a new product has a new price, has a new energy efficiency, and is a specific way we can directly look in the manufacturing commercial materials, basically, which is very, very nice, especially when we start talking about consumer products, or for that matter cars, because we can just look up the average prices of a vehicle category as it is today. The lagging effect, that is something that very few policymakers actually takes into account in my personal experience, and we have numerous problems with that. I can mention that in Denmark they're talking about we should have 1 million electric cars on the road by 2030, which is only 10 years away, and that's the majority of vehicles on Danish roads then should be electric. And I can tell with this method that it's going to be very difficult to make that, just because of lag effect, because that is a stock related policy, but it hasn't been converted into sales per year that needs to happen. So the benchmarking of whether we are on track or not is actually quite bad if you don't have this. And if you're working with the averages, you don't know, simply don't know. But with your stock turnover method, that can be observed, that can be tested. The avoidance of using averages, because then you would have to calculate averages for everything. If you can avoid using that as an input, as a general thing, I think that's just great, because it's a much more direct. Not using averages is a much more direct data input, which is good. And then you can also specify very specific differences between vintages. So if you have a product category where quite a lot have happened in the latter years or in the coming years, that could be important. The revolution from CFD to LED lights, the whole related, but the whole computer revolution, where we actually, most people have gone from very energy consuming hardware to very energy efficient hardware. Screens, TVs, the same thing. Quite a lot have happened last few years, and maybe in some sectors quite a lot will happen more. So that's quite important to look at, especially with something that has a rotational development like these consumer categories have. So yeah, I hope you saw the benefit of stock turnover. But we're going to talk about the general stock turnover method in the next video, and the video after that is going to be transport stock turnover video. So now it's going to be more technical, and we're going to be looking at Leap.